You're listening to the Recovered Life Show, the show that helps people in recovery live their best recovered lives. And here is your host, Damon Frank.
And welcome back to the Recovered Life Show. It is Monday, October 10th, 2022. How you doing, Kristina Dennis?
I am doing wonderful. Damon Frank, how are you? Happy Monday.
Yes, happy Monday. We are into October. I'm a little casual today. I'm wearing the V-neck t-shirt because it is Los Angeles. I don't have to go all fall.
That's
I don't have to go all
right.
fall on you.
That is right. It is very easy to miss fall in Los Angeles. I call it second summer most of the time.
It is the second summer. You get to turn down that air conditioning just a little bit and, kind of snuggle up in 90-degree weather and listen to an episode of the Recovered Life Show.
Absolutely. Yes. And please, thank you, everyone who tunes in. Make sure that you like, share, and follow our podcast. Download it, leave us a comment, subscribe. We are so appreciative of all of the comments. It allows us to, bring content that you like, and it allows us to grow this movement. So absolutely, when you're snuggling down, make sure you don't miss us. We've got lots and lots of good stuff coming.
Guys, it helps so much. You can get it on any platform that you download
That
podcasts.
is right.
Just type in the Recovered Life Show and you are there. So Kristina, we've been planning on doing this episode for quite a while because as many people know that follow us on Instagram or YouTube, I've said in the show that I suffered from dyslexia really bad, not only as a kid, but, into my adulthood. And I guess once you have dyslexia, you always have dyslexia. I don't think you can get rid of it. I don't think it's something like a pimple or something. I think you have it, right?
Yep. You have a neurodivergent brain. You have, differences in your executive function, and you can learn how to overcome them. We know this with ADHD. There are 7 types. We know so much more about the brain because of the fMRI, which is literally in the last 8-10 years where we can see it. But the amount of effort that you have to expend to overcome it is extraordinary. So I don't think that it's something that you should ever feel like, oh, I've got it down. Be proud of the fact that you're able to overcome it because it's hard work.
Yeah, and we wanted to do this episode about the link between dyslexia and addiction. Really,
Absolutely.
the Recovered Life Show, the shows that Kristina and I do together are really just about conversing about our lives, about what's going on with us and our lives in recovery. And it was interesting because I've always felt, I knew that I was a kid of the 80s, obviously, right? So dyslexia became a big thing, I think, after I graduated high school, but it still was kind of a little buzzword. And I kind of got help with dyslexia way late, like not until college. And, I didn't know what was going on. I just knew that I couldn't really read, correctly or how they said I should be able to read. And sometimes the comprehension was good, but wasn't as good. But I knew that in other ways I was far superior in social communication. Like I could see people and go, oh man, they're just like, I understood certain things a little bit more in depth, especially more complex things. I tend to be able to kind of see. And you had forwarded, it was interesting because we talked about doing the show. You'd forward me this article about people with dyslexia is kind of the new way to think, right?
Yes, you're the creatives. And, it really makes sense that you had this, superpower because the hypervigilance that it took for you to overcome, that different way of thinking allowed you to grow skills that people who have typical neurotypical brains, neurotypical reading comprehension are able to do it, don't have it. And so I totally agree with you that you were able to grow that into a positive, but there's a lot of energy around it. And it makes me so sad, knowing I'll tell you, there's something that applies to ladies is that often these kinds of symptoms, these kinds of learning challenges don't show up the same way. And so a lot of people will miss a diagnosis even in today's age. And so I think it can still happen where people will miss it. So, just like you said it, you did not learn until you were in your college years, and that's rough.
Yeah, I was learning, but not the way that everybody else learned. Right.
Exactly.
And this is why I want to do this show about. I'd always wondered about the link between dyslexia and addiction. Are people that have dyslexia as children, that are maybe diagnosed and are showing those signs of dyslexia as children, are they more likely to suffer from addiction in their teen years, in their 20s, right, in adulthood? And so I did a little deep dive into it because that's how I am. I can get a
Yeah.
little obsessive about. So I wanted kind of, man, like, what is this? And it was really interesting because I stumbled upon this really great article, and it was from the National Library of Medicine, and it's all about biotechnology information. And
Hmm.
the whole thing was dyslexia and substance abuse. But one of the things it said is that there's also some preliminary evidence to suggest that individuals in substance abuse treatment have a higher incidence of learning disabilities than the general population. And that was really interesting. So there is some like actual physical proof, right?
Yes.
That you have a much higher, that when they're getting people, when they come into addiction recovery, they have a much higher learning disability issues. And the most recognizable learning disability is dyslexia for the most part.
Right.
So it's interesting that there's a link there. But I started to kind of think about like, well, why are people with dyslexia more prone to addiction? Why
Yes.
why is that, right? And it's interesting. I mean, I have a couple of thoughts, honestly, from me being a kid with dyslexia and then later, suffering from addiction and then getting into recovery, right? I think the big thing is escapism, you know?
Mm.
I will tell you that. I think escapism is an issue with people that have dyslexia, because the day-to-day of you doing what you do, right? It's so difficult and there's so many obstacles, especially when you're a kid or you're in a teen. There's so many obstacles of and disadvantages, right? So you're always the low person on the totem pole. You're always the person that got the D or the C minus or the F. You're not the person who got the B plus or the A or the solid B, right?
Right.
So I think a lot of it is when you have off time outside of school. I know for me, my first drug of choice was escapism.
Oh, so true. And I think it also has to do, and you can tell me, because we're not saying that it's a causation, we're saying it's a correlation, but that's the
Yes.
first step to really see it. And the truth is, escapism, I think trauma relief, they kind of go hand in hand, because there was trauma in the fact that you were the kid who got the D, or you were the one that knew you were different. And we all know that junior high is the breaking point. Like, in order to feel as if you can survive, you must belong, right? The othering that happens in junior high is so effective in hurting. And I can't imagine that in second, third, fourth, if you were already feeling other and then you get to this critical,
Yeah.
pivotal point and you feel it, of course you want to escape. I
Yeah, I know
absolutely
for me,
agree.
I mean, I'm going to tell you honestly, Christina, for me, it was escapism first,
Yep,
right? It was entertainment. It was doing things that would, like, physical things that I could escape, or things that I was good at, right?
of
That,
course.
that were not in that structured, we learn differently now. Like, I've watched my daughter go through school. She learns differently. Like, they do PowerPoint presentations. Like, I told her the other day, I said, like, if we were to had computers in the 80s, early 80s, and I could do PowerPoint presentations and videos, I would have gone to Harvard. Like,
Absolutely.
because the way in which people learn are so different now. But society being so prone, I mean, like, we talk about this all the time in the Recovered Life Show, Christina. Like, we're helping people that are younger and younger and younger, that are identifying as people who are alcoholic or have addiction problems.
We sure are. And it is scary, isn't it? Especially with these designer drugs that are out here. And so this is such an important conversation to have. 1 in 6 children have a learning challenge. 1 in 6. So, I mean, when you think about how many of them are sitting in our schools, and early detection is imperative. But for all children, the education system has to change. In many ways, it has not changed in over over 100 years. And I think that we're starting to see that show up in, the 12-step groups. Like, these young people cannot expend the amount of energy that's necessary. They must escape. They must find a way to bring relief, and they must feel like they belong. And the activities have changed as well. I feel like I sound so old, like I'm telling the story about walking 5 miles in the snow to school when I say it, but it is true. Like you said, you went and you sought out things that you did have some mastery, or at least the capability of having mastery out of it. I mean, I'm very curious, like, what you did. Was it sports? What happened? And wow, a
Well,
lot of that
I
stuff.
was involved in sports. I was involved in sports,
Uh-huh.
and I liked movies, and I wanted to get in the
Mm-hmm.
entertainment industry and that kind of stuff. But really, it's like you're talking about trauma. For me, it wasn't junior high. It happened much. See, I think kids with severe dyslexia, like I had, where I was inverting letters and I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
read through a set right. I had an eye tracking issue that later I had to
Mm-hmm.
deal with that had to do with dyslexia. It started earlier for me. I remember I got held back in
Ouch.
third grade.
Oh,
And that
goodness.
was a demarcation line when I got held back. I remember that demarcation line now. And honestly, I believe because of kind of the way it was handled, and no fault to the people who did it, they just didn't know, right? Like,
No, of
I'm not
course.
playing the blame game on that. But one of the things that is that demarcation line when I was in third grade and they decided that they were going to hold me back. I kind of, for me, I was like, okay, I'm not going to win at this game.
Mm.
I am not gonna, I am not gonna win at this game. I
Oh,
remember making a conscious choice saying, that's it. Like, I'm not gonna win at this game because I had
it breaks my
tried.
heart. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're just like, you're just not putting the effort in. I'm like, no, I'm putting the effort in. I'm just not, I just can't do it the way you want me to do it. I understand conceptually what you're talking about. I just can't do it like you want me to do it. Right. Like, and I remember that demarcation line is like, man, that's not, and then that led to escapism, and
Mm-hmm.
escapism led to sugar. And
Mm.
sugar was really, honestly, and we talked about this the other day on a clubhouse room.
Yes.
Sugar was my gateway drug to alcohol.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Uh-huh. It's the first one in anyone. And women definitely know that. I think that when they start doing the work, when we start doing our recovery work, and, you get done with, maybe the first set of alcohol trauma and the things that you have to do, I don't know anybody who doesn't have to walk through the food issue. A lot of us call the food issue the mother wound, right? And I look through a lens of trauma, you look through a lens of, feeling othered, absolutely, or escapism. It is the first thing we have access to is sugar.
Absolutely. And the thing is, I think the interesting thing with dyslexia is thinking. I will
Really.
tell you one thing that's been an advantage to me is that, especially in the business world, is I think different than people who have MBAs. I just think, I just think differently. And I've been in rooms and groups of people where I just think different. And it's refreshing because now I think the way in which people think that have dyslexia is much more like, right, the way in which they're teaching people to think now, much more
Okay.
kind of out of the box, being able to see it. But the interesting thing about that is I think that, we define alcoholism primarily as a thinking disorder, right? Like we
Mm-hmm.
do. At the end of the day, it's like it's a non-pattern. Like, who really, at the end of the day, Christina, honestly, like, who at the end of the day is just like, oh, well, I'm totally screwing up my life thinking, oh, this is a good idea, or maybe I could drink in this way, or maybe, right? All these things that we associate to alcoholism really comes down to a thinking disorder at the end of
Right.
the day, right? We have to change our thinking. We know that when we get into recovery, that just getting sober isn't enough. We've got to actually change our thinking. And it's interesting
Absolutely.
because dyslexia is a thinking issue as well, a different type, but a thinking issue, not just the same.
I'm curious what you think about dopamine in the range of dyslexia. And I know we have to go on a break, but I'd love to hear what you think about that, because they're really learning that dopamine, and we're learning that in the world of addiction, that dopamine seeking is one of the major players, which is, I kind of feel like you could say no duh, but we can see it actually on our brain now. And with ADHD, they struggle with dopamine. seeking. It's one of the
Yeah.
reasons why they do stuff. And I'm wondering what you think about that
I
with
want to dive
dyslexia.
into that. Let's dive into the dopamine conversation when we get back from this quick break, because I think that there's something there. And I think especially in training yourself that
Hmm.
you need this reward in which to go do certain other things. So let's dive into that dopamine conversation when we get back from this quick break. If you are newly sober, trying to get sober, or you've been sober for decades and are looking to take your sobriety to the next level, the Recovery Breakthrough 6-week transformation concierge coaching program might be right for you. Have Damon Frank and Kristina Dennis build a custom roadmap to get you on the path to getting what you really need. Receive hands-on concierge coaching and stay focused and productive with our daily check-ins. If you're ready to experience your recovery breakthrough and start the journey towards the transformation you deserve, book a free Get to Know You call today and find out what is possible in your recovery. To find out more about Recovery Breakthrough and to book your free call, go to recoveredlife.us. That's recoveredlife.us.
You're listening to the Recovered Life Show, the show that helps people in recovery live their best recovered lives.
All right, as promised, when we came back, we are continuing the conversation between the link between dyslexia and addiction. Kristina, you were talking about dopamine hits.
Yes.
Let's talk about that.
Yes.
Fill everybody in on what a dopamine hit is, because somebody might be listening and not really kind of understand what that means.
Well, okay. First of all, dopamine is not the devil. It is what we need in order to reach for something, the anticipation of getting something. It's what helps us plan. Just picking up a cup, that dopamine's important. But the secret, the dirty little secret about dopamine is once you reach that goal, once you pick up that cup, dopamine goes away. The other thing that happens with dopamine is that you don't have access to serotonin and oxytocin, right? And so we know with alcohol that once the brain has determined that the best dopamine it can get is alcohol, it will prioritize alcohol over all kinds of things, over, sex, food, relationships. It is why your loved one or me would rather drink or needs to drink, is addicted to drinking, because my brain is there saying dopamine, dopamine, dopamine. That's what you want. And it's taken over every other part of my life. And, I think it's important to know how it works, because once you realize that after you get that initial hit of dopamine, and you are, let's say, an active addiction to alcohol, it goes away. And if I think about it, knowing that language in the last year, there's been some really beautiful literature put out, The Molecule of More, very fascinating. It kind of helps me understand that the shame needs to be taken out of active alcohol addiction. Our brains are designed to do it, and it will always be futile. So, that first couple of drinks if I think back to when I drank that first couple of drinks, it was like after that, I wouldn't be able to stop because I was always looking for that original dopamine hit. Now, with learning challenges, dopamine is very seeking, because in ADHD, it's been proven that people who suffer from ADHD or who have executive dysfunction, because ADHD is very poorly named. It's not about attention at all. It's about the fact that the executive function is different. They will seek dopamine because dopamine is actually suppressed in their brain, which is why hyperactivity comes involved, and it starts pushing us dopamine, dopamine. And I'm curious about dyslexia. And since you've been able to overcome it, what it looks like for you. Have you ever thought about it in the terms of that?
Yeah, it's interesting, because I was thinking when you were talking about that, I was like, wow, where was I during that period of time, right? Like you think back and it's been, after being sober for 29 years and then having a run of actual active addiction, right? It's been a while. But you said something that was kind of interesting. It was like, you can grab onto anything for that dopamine hit. And one of the things that I remember was, after I went to college and there was somebody who helped me out. I always give a shout out. His name was Bright Rope. And he's passed now, but he's a Native American teacher that was at my college. And he really helped me with dyslexia, taught me to read, found out what was going on with tracking.
Wow.
He even talked to my parents and brought them in because I failed out the first semester of college. I was really barely hanging on. And it was interesting because I made another decision that I made, hey, you know what? I can win. And then when I started having wins, I remember getting addicted to those wins.
Of course.
And I think honestly, when you said that, it's very interesting. I think everybody does that to a certain degree. People would much rather win than they would than to lose, I think, really. Right. Yeah.
Duh.
But what happened is that can craft, if you have addiction, that will craft itself into the fact of I'm going to get a dopamine hit. And if I win, that's going to fix everything. Right.
Yeah.
Which, as we know in life, there's plenty of successful people that win at school and win at work and that just aren't, nope. that take a dive bomb. So it is interesting that you say that because, I think, and I think also I've met people too. I'm not this personality. I'm much more of a, you hit me and I'm going to get up off the mat. But there are people who get, I think, dopamine hits from losing. I've met some of those people.
Absolutely. We know that there is a predictive light up in the brain that if you are a worrier and you predict it correctly and it comes through, it literally lights up the brain that is very similar to gambling addicts. So we know we still need lots more studies to figure this out, but we know that there actually is somebody getting a hit from losing, from being predictive and from feeling like they have an idea. And, there's a lot of, this is my story, this is what happens, self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, it's going to take 20 shows to kind of go through all of that. But absolutely, there is correlation that's been proven that you can become addicted to worrying.
So, and I think it's interesting because I've met those people in recovery, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, I think the thing is, actually, this has been a great episode because it made me think, right? because I like, these are conversations. So we're just talking about things that we would at a fellowship table, right? In a 12-step meeting. It's the stuff that happens that we talk about after those meetings, right? And it's interesting because I've met so many people that are addicted to losing and being a loser in recovery. And you could see that they get a dopamine hit. I think that it's the same thing though with people who are addicted to winning or want to win, right? Or achievement. There's that whole hustle kind of thing that's out there now, which I think is just one big dopamine hit. It has nothing really to do with reality.
No.
But I think the issue with dyslexics is that a lot of the formulas in which to get in and out of things that could be addictive, dyslexics think differently. Right? We just think differently. We go about a word problem differently. This is just proven. Our approach is different. That's why social communication works so well with people who are dyslexic, because our approach with people and being able to read people is way more sophisticated than the average person that doesn't have dyslexia. That's been my experience. I could walk into a room and kind of read people a lot more effectively. But the problem is getting out of things. Certain things, certain processes, dyslexics don't think that way. So when you're trying to get out of this, hey, I'm a loser, I'm always going to be a loser, it's never going to work out, that this addicted to worry or addicted to success, I always win, I could never lose, that kind of workaholism hustle thing, getting out of it, because you Google that and the process that they give for most people to get out of it doesn't necessarily always work with somebody who's dyslexic.
Oh, tell me, how does it, I'm so curious, because if you don't have, that makes sense. If you don't have access to that type of thinking, those neural pathways haven't grown. They're not the longest ones in your world. It takes an active, an intense amount of emotional energy to change and to believe. And it also takes vulnerability and fear and cleaning up trauma. I mean, this is one of the things that I love about the Recovered Life community and our conversations is that we really do break down all the other parts. We know the problems don't end with physical sobriety. And so I absolutely want to know from your point, since you are gracious enough to always share about your challenges, how do you move through that?
I think a lot of it is process, right? As a dyslexic, it's so interesting because as a sober coach, I think one of the things that I see is what is the process that's going to help this person be able to retain long-term sobriety? Right? Because it's the process, right? And the thing is that like there's a process for reading and punctuation and spelling. I'm somebody like when I write out business to this day, Kristina, I'll write it out, I'll spell it wrong. I'll go back and I'll redo it. Like, so there's certain things that don't go away with dyslexia, but certain things have changed. And I got to tell you, the recovery process helped my cure, I'm not going to say cure my dyslexia, but help manage my dyslexia a lot more. I'll tell you what, because I had to learn basic things that I would do over and over and over again, systems that I could go back to run these systems over and over again. And those systems I knew would give me an outcome, right? So just like somebody who's struggling with recovery, okay, well, I'm going to call somebody, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do that, right? And by the time I do all this, I'm not going to feel like I'm drinking. Well, it's the same thing, I think, with dyslexia is like what I found is finding that process. So a lot of times when people talk to me, I'm always going to the process. Okay, well, how am I going to get from A to Z, right? Because I need a process that I can see visually, not just that I could read. Because I'm going to comprehend something by doing it, by touching it, or I'm going to see it by actually visually seeing it.
Well, which explains that article that I sent you about the fact that you have the opportunity as a dyslexic to bring so much more creativity to it because you're not confined in those rules. You know, I had to redo handwriting in 6th grade. It was so atrocious that my 2nd grade teacher or my 6th grade teacher made me do 2nd grade handwriting books.
Ah, you got the slap.
I did. Gifted child, terrible handwriting. And I realize that slows down the process. You know, there's a certain amount of journaling that you can do where you could barely, my journaling is incredibly illegible. And this is such a small little comparison, but because I allow those rules to be taken off, I get to a much higher consciousness.
I think that's it. I think that's what you're talking about. It's these processes. It's the way in which you look at things. Look, I think, more what this said actually in the National Library of Medicine, or I'm going to put a link to the article in the show notes so everybody could check it out, is it says that there's just not enough data to really say conclusively, but there's not a lot of data on people with addictive thinking anyway. Right. So I think as it goes along, I think, 100 years from now, 50 years from now, 20 years from now, I think that they're going to come up with a pattern. Like, what is this pattern? So people can predict it early. Does this mean that if a kid is dyslexic early in life, that they're going to suffer from addiction? I don't think that's what it means, but it is kind of interesting that when this was written, it used to be 1 in 10 people suffered from addiction and 1 in 10 suffer from learning disabilities. So it is kind of an interesting correlation.
Well, and now we know it's 4 in 10, and what I just said was 1 in 6.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to know it's not going away. So we have to keep searching, and we have to talk about these things because this does affect ability to be sober. And when you have a little relief, like when I had a little relief in how trauma affected my ADHD adjacent behavior, it helped me a lot.
Yeah, it does. I think knowledge and understanding yourself and looking at these patterns, I think will help. I think having that conversation earlier on, though, I think is good with learning disabilities, because I think what it does is it allows people to have the conversation to be open. Like, Kristina, I remember if you had alcoholism in your family, People did not know that there's a link. If you had alcoholism in your family, you were much more likely to maybe suffer from alcoholism, right?
Right.
Especially if it was in the immediate family. And now that's kind of common knowledge, but before no one was like, nah, it's a willpower issue. So I think as we move forward and science becomes more and more and more, right? I think more in depth, I think we'll have more data on this.
Well, and as an interventionist, and you know this, as we are interventionists, how many times do we come across somebody who is, a younger person having the intervention? They say, and you go do the genealogy, the genealogram, which is important. That's when the stories start coming up about Uncle Bill and Grandpa Joe and Grandma this, and it's amazing how correlated it is. So we do need to talk about it more.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a great episode, just shining the light a little bit more, going into this conversation. I've had this conversation before, but not so in depth. And I think that's what this show is all about, is just having these conversations. So thank you everybody for joining us. Please like, share, and follow, and we will see you on the next Recovered Life Show.
Bye. Have a beautiful Monday.
Keep the conversation going. Join Recovered Life, a community of like-minded people who are looking to live their best recovered lives. Membership is free, and you can apply at recoveredlife.us.